Welcome back to Unheard Stories, where we bring you the most shocking and unforgettable tales of betrayal and revenge. Before we dive into today's story, let's get the conversation started. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below, and let's see how far our story travels. And hey, if you're new here, don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you're always the first to hear these jaw-dropping stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let me ask you something. What would you do if the person you loved the most betrayed you in a way that shattered everything you believed in? Could you hold back your anger long enough to plan the perfect revenge? Or would you act on impulse and let emotions take over? Today's story is one of heartbreak, deception, and a revenge so calculated it left everyone involved speechless. It's the tale of Daniel, a devoted husband who thought he had the perfect marriage, until one cruel twist of fate revealed his wife's darkest secret. But Daniel wasn't about to let the betrayal go unnoticed. What follows is a shocking journey of discovery, heartbreak, and epic revenge that you won't be able to stop watching. So, sit tight, grab a snack, and prepare for an emotional roller coaster that will leave you questioning everything about trust and betrayal. Daniel prided himself on being a man of routine and principle. At 39, he had built a stable and respectable life as a civil engineer. His days were predictable yet fulfilling. Early morning jogs through the quiet streets, hours meticulously spent on blueprints, and evenings unwinding with Clara, his wife of 12 years. To Daniel, trust was the foundation of everything he valued: his marriage, his friendships, and his career. Though quiet and reserved, Daniel wasn't dull. He enjoyed thoughtful conversations, especially with Clara, whose creativity often brought an unexpected vibrancy to his structured world. He loved surprising her with small tokens of affection, flowers on a weekday or an impromptu dinner date to her favorite restaurant. In Daniel's eyes, their marriage wasn't just a partnership, it was his anchor. Clara was his safe space, his muse, the person he thought he knew better than anyone else. But beneath Daniel's steady exterior lay a growing unease. In recent months, Clara's vibrant energy had dulled. She smiled less, her laughter felt forced, and their once effortless conversations turned into polite exchanges. Daniel dismissed it as work stress or a temporary phase. He trusted Clara completely and believed their love was unshakable. Clara, at 35, was Daniel's opposite in many ways. A painter and free spirit, she found joy in moments of spontaneity, something she often teased Daniel about. "You're so predictable," she would laugh, smudging paint on his face during a playful moment in her studio. While Daniel valued structure, Clara thrived in chaos. Colorful canvases sprawled across her studio floor, jars of brushes in every corner, and an ever-present streak of paint on her hands. Her paintings were vibrant and passionate, reflecting the emotions she often kept hidden. For Clara, art was more than a profession, it was her escape. She had always felt that Daniel, for all his love and care, couldn't fully understand her world. He admired her work but never truly saw the layers of emotion behind each brushstroke. Lately, Clara felt trapped. Her marriage, though stable, had become monotonous. She felt like she was suffocating in a routine that didn't feed her soul. Daniel's constant affection, once endearing, now felt like a mirror reflecting her own emptiness. She wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't fulfilled either. Her paintings grew darker, and she found herself spending more time in her studio, avoiding conversations and burying herself in her work. And then she met James. James was the kind of man who could light up a room. At 42, he had a charm that was both magnetic and effortless. A successful entrepreneur, James exuded confidence, from the designer suits he wore to the way he spoke about his ventures. He was charismatic, quick-witted, and undeniably attractive. But James was also a man with secrets. Beneath his polished exterior was a complicated life. Married to Helena, a kind and devoted woman, James had mastered the art of living a double life. To outsiders, he and Helena were the picture-perfect couple. Their social media profiles showcased luxurious vacations, family dinners, and anniversary celebrations that seemed plucked from a dream. Yet James was restless. He thrived on excitement and the thrill of the forbidden. When he met Clara at an art exhibition, he saw in her the same longing for something more, something different. Their conversations began innocently enough, discussions about her artwork, his admiration for creativity, but the spark between them was undeniable. For Clara, James represented everything she felt was missing in her life. He was bold where Daniel was reserved, unpredictable where Daniel was steady. Their connection grew quickly, and soon their conversations moved from art galleries to secret messages and late-night phone calls. Clara felt alive again in ways she hadn't for years, but the guilt gnawed at her. James, on the other hand, felt little remorse. To him, Clara was an escape from the pressures of his own marriage. Helena, though loving and supportive, no longer excited him. His affair with Clara wasn't just about Clara, it was about reclaiming the thrill he felt he deserved. As the weeks turned into months, the emotional distance between Daniel and Clara grew. Daniel noticed the changes, the way Clara's phone was always within reach, her smile when a message came through, the way she avoided his gaze during dinner. But he trusted her. Every time doubts crept into his mind, he reminded himself of the woman he married, the one who had stood by him through thick and thin. Clara, meanwhile, wrestled with her emotions. She still loved Daniel in her own way, but James had become an addiction. He made her feel seen, wanted, and free from the constraints of her predictable life. She convinced herself that the affair was harmless, that she could balance both worlds without causing harm. For James, Clara was a fleeting thrill. He enjoyed the secrecy and the stolen moments, but his life with Helena wasn't something he intended to abandon. To him, Clara was a beautiful distraction, nothing more. Helena, James's wife, was blissfully unaware of the affair. A kind and empathetic woman, she devoted herself to her family and supported James in all his endeavors. Helena was the type of person who always put others first, sometimes to her own detriment. She trusted James implicitly and had no reason to doubt his loyalty. But cracks were beginning to form in their marriage too. James's frequent late nights and vague explanations had started to weigh on Helena. She brushed off her suspicions, convincing herself that James was simply busy with work. After all, they had built a life together, a beautiful home, shared memories, and a future she believed in. As these four lives became intertwined, the stage was set for a collision none of them could predict. For Daniel, the betrayal would be a revelation that shattered his world. For Clara, it would force her to confront the choices that had led her here. For James, the affair would become more than just a game as the consequences spiraled out of control. And for Helena, the truth would turn her life upside down in ways she never imagined. None of them knew it yet, but the choices they made would change everything. Daniel had always trusted Clara without question. Their marriage had been built on that trust, a foundation he believed was unshakable. But recently something had shifted. At first it was small things, Clara's distracted demeanor during dinner, her sudden attachment to her phone, and the way she seemed to avoid eye contact when he asked about her day. It was easy to dismiss these as coincidences. She was an artist after all, and Daniel had always admired how deeply she threw herself into her work. Maybe she's just in a creative rut, he told himself. But the thought didn't quiet the uneasy feeling growing in the pit of his stomach. Daniel started noticing patterns. Clara's phone was never out of her reach, and she would quickly turn the screen off when he walked into the room. She started taking calls outside or in her studio, closing the door behind her with an almost apologetic smile. Just talking to a friend, she'd say, but her explanations lacked the warmth and sincerity he was used to. One night, as they sat together on the couch, Clara was texting someone. Daniel leaned over casually, trying to see the screen. She immediately angled the phone away, her laugh forced. "Just a silly art group chat," she said, slipping the phone into her pocket and changing the subject. The unease grew. Daniel told himself that he was being paranoid, that the distance he felt was just part of the ebb and flow of any long-term relationship. But deep down he knew something was wrong. The moment Daniel discovered the truth wasn't dramatic. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Clara had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs in her studio. It was a rare occurrence. Clara never left her phone lying around anymore. At first, Daniel ignored it. He told himself that he wasn't the kind of husband who invaded his wife's privacy. But then the phone buzzed, lighting up the screen with a message. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." Daniel froze. His first instinct was denial. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a joke between friends. But then another message appeared, and this one left no room for doubt. "She doesn't suspect a thing, does she?" His heart pounded as he picked up the phone, his hands trembling. He unlocked it using the password he had long known but never felt the need to use. The message thread was open, a trail of evidence he couldn't ignore. The messages were intimate, filled with playful banter, inside jokes, and veiled promises. There were mentions of secret meetings, late-night rendezvous, and moments shared when he thought Clara had been painting or running errands. Each word felt like a punch to the gut, shattering the image he had of their marriage. But it wasn't just the messages that broke him, it was the pictures. Clara and the man, smiling together, her eyes lit with the kind of joy Daniel hadn't seen in years. Daniel sat down at the kitchen table, his mind racing. He felt a wave of emotions crashing over him. Disbelief, anger, heartbreak. How could Clara do this? The woman he had loved, supported, and built a life with was living a double life. He tried to rationalize it, to find some way to explain what he had seen. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But no matter how hard he tried, the messages were burned into his mind. The anger came next. How long had this been going on? How many times had Clara lied to his face, smiling at him while she sent those messages? How many nights had he cooked her favorite meals, thinking he was showing his love, while she was thinking about someone else? And then there was the man. Daniel didn't know who he was yet, but he already hated him. This stranger had intruded on his marriage, taken what was his, and left him in this spiral of doubt and pain. Daniel's first instinct was to confront Clara immediately. He wanted to storm up to the studio, throw the phone in her face and demand answers. But he stopped himself. Clara was good at deflecting, at finding ways to turn the conversation around. If he confronted her now, she'd deny it, make excuses, or worse, try to make him doubt his own instincts. No, Daniel realized he needed to be sure. He needed undeniable proof before he faced her. Over the next few days, Daniel began to observe Clara more closely. He watched the way her face lit up when her phone buzzed, the way she disappeared into her studio for hours, and the way her answers became vaguer when he asked about her day. He started piecing together a timeline. He remembered the nights she had come home late, claiming she had been working on a commission for a client. The weekends she said she was meeting friends but returned home with a faint perfume he didn't recognize. It all started to make sense. One evening, while Clara was in the shower, Daniel checked her phone again. This time he scrolled further back through the messages, piecing together the full story. The man's name was James, and their affair had been going on for months. They met at an art exhibition where Clara had been showcasing her work. The messages revealed a side of Clara Daniel had never seen. She spoke to James with a playfulness and passion that had long been absent from their marriage. She talked about feeling trapped, about needing an escape. And James, ever the charmer, played right into it. But there was something else. In one of the messages, James mentioned his wife. Daniel stared at the screen, the words blurring as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. James was married too. This wasn't just a betrayal of his marriage, it was a web of lies that extended beyond his own home. The realization fueled his anger. Clara wasn't just cheating on him, she was helping another man betray his wife. The thought made his stomach turn. How could she be part of something so cruel, so selfish? But even in his anger, Daniel felt a strange sense of clarity. He wasn't just a victim in this situation. James' wife, whoever she was, deserved to know the truth just as much as he did. As Daniel sat in the dark kitchen, the phone still in his hand, he felt a new emotion take hold: determination. He wasn't going to let Clara and James get away with this. He wasn't going to be the passive husband, sitting silently while they carried on their affair. He began to form a plan. It wouldn't be impulsive or reckless. It would be calculated, deliberate, and unforgettable. Clara and James thought they were in control, but they had underestimated him. Daniel placed the phone back on the counter, careful to leave everything as it was. He had all the proof he needed, but now wasn't the time to act. He would wait, bide his time, and make sure that when he struck, there would be no escape for either of them. As he climbed the stairs to bed, Daniel felt a strange sense of calm. The betrayal still stung, but the seeds of revenge had taken root. Clara and James had no idea what was coming, but Daniel was determined to make them feel the same pain they had caused him. The house was eerily silent as Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glow of Clara's phone. It had been months since the first seed of doubt had taken root in his mind, and now, with every word on the screen before him, that doubt had grown into a raging certainty. Clara was at James' house. The proof was in her messages, the location shared inadvertently through her phone, and her too-perfect lie: "I'm meeting an old friend." Daniel clenched his fists, his knuckles white against the wooden table. The betrayal burned, a fire coursing through his veins that threatened to consume him. His mind raced, filled with images he didn't want to imagine. Clara smiling for James, touching him, sharing the intimacy that was supposed to belong to their marriage alone. His phone sat next to Clara's, open to the tracking app he had installed weeks ago. It confirmed what he already knew: she wasn't at a coffee shop with a friend. She was at his house, James' house. The coordinates glared at him, taunting him with the truth. Daniel's anger boiled over, and he grabbed his own phone. If Clara thought she could sneak around behind his back, if James thought he could intrude on Daniel's life and take what wasn't his, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Daniel opened a blank text message, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He knew he had one shot to deliver the perfect blow, a message so precise and cutting it would haunt them both. His anger spilled onto the screen, each word carefully chosen to slice deep into their secret world. I know everything. Enjoy tonight because it will be the last time you spend together peacefully. He stared at the words, his chest heaving as the full weight of what he had written sank in. This wasn't just a text, it was a declaration of war, a promise that their betrayal wouldn't go unpunished. Daniel's thumb hovered over the send button. For a brief moment he hesitated. Would this make things worse? Would they laugh at him, dismiss his pain as irrelevant? His grip tightened around the phone. No. They needed to know what he was capable of. With a deep breath he pressed send. The seconds that followed felt like hours. Daniel sat motionless, his heart pounding in his chest. The message was out there now, delivered to James, cutting through the quiet evening like a lightning strike. He imagined the scene unfolding in James' house. Clara would be there, her laughter ringing out, oblivious to the bomb Daniel had just dropped into their lives. James would check his phone, read the message, and panic would set in. The thought gave Daniel a grim sense of satisfaction. But as the minutes stretched on, doubt began to creep in. What if they ignored him? What if Clara and James dismissed his message as nothing more than an empty threat? The idea gnawed at him, fueling his anger even further. The phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as he saw James' number flash across the screen. He didn't answer. Let him stew in his fear. Moments later, Clara's name appeared. Daniel clenched his jaw, rejecting the call with a swift swipe of his finger. He wasn't ready to hear her excuses, her lies. Not yet. Then came the audio message. Daniel hesitated for a moment before pressing play. Clara's voice filled the room, trembling and frantic. Daniel, please let me explain. It's not what you think. Please don't do anything rash. We need to talk. Her words were laced with desperation, but they only fueled Daniel's resolve. How dare she try to manipulate him, to twist her betrayal into something forgivable? There was no justification for what she had done. As the night wore on, Daniel's phone buzzed repeatedly with calls and messages from both Clara and James. He ignored them all, letting their panic build. He imagined the chaos unfolding in James' house, the whispered conversations, the frantic attempts to delete messages, and the sheer terror of knowing their secret was no longer safe. At one point, Clara sent another message. Please, Daniel. I love you. Let me explain everything. The words made him laugh bitterly. Well, how could she claim to love him while she was wrapped in another man's arms? The hypocrisy was almost comical. But it wasn't her words that tormented him the most, it was the silence that followed. After hours of desperate messages, there was nothing. No calls, no texts. The quiet was deafening, and it gnawed at Daniel's mind. What were they doing? Were they plotting a way out, trying to cover their tracks? The thought sent another surge of anger coursing through him. In James' house, the atmosphere was tense. Clara paced the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. What do we do? She whispered, her voice shaky. James sat on the couch, staring at his own phone as if it were a ticking time bomb. I don't know, he muttered. How did he find out? Did you tell him something? Of course not. Clara snapped, her panic giving way to frustration. I've been careful. This doesn't make sense. James ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He must have been watching us. Maybe he followed you. Clara stopped pacing, her eyes wide with fear. What if he's outside right now? What if he's watching us? James shook his head. He wouldn't do that. He's just trying to scare us. But the truth was, James wasn't sure. The message Daniel had sent was short but powerful, a threat that hung in the air like a storm cloud. James prided himself on being in control, but this was a situation he couldn't manipulate or charm his way out of. Clara's phone buzzed again and she flinched. It was another message from Daniel, but this time it wasn't words, it was a picture. She opened it with trembling hands, her breath catching in her throat. It was a screenshot of a photo from James' social media, one that featured him and his wife. The caption beneath it read, "Does she know?" James leaned over her shoulder, his face pale as he saw the image. Oh God, he muttered. Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with panic. What do we do now? Back at home, Daniel leaned back in his chair, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The picture had been the perfect touch, a reminder that James' betrayal extended far beyond his own marriage. He imagined the fear spreading between them, the weight of their lies finally catching up to them. They thought they were untouchable, but Daniel had made sure they knew otherwise. As the night deepened, Daniel felt a strange sense of calm. The pain of Clara's betrayal was still there, but it was overshadowed by the satisfaction of knowing he had taken the first step in dismantling their illusion of control. This was just the beginning. Daniel had more planned, and he knew that when he was finished, Clara and James would never forget the consequences of their actions. Daniel sat in his dimly lit living room, the glow of his laptop casting long shadows on the walls. His fingers moved restlessly across the keyboard, searching for the next clue. The rage and betrayal he felt had simmered into cold determination. He had made a promise to himself. This wasn't going to end with just Clara and James. The devastation they had caused would come back to haunt them. As he scrolled through James' social media profiles, Daniel began piecing together the man's carefully curated life. James was everything Daniel had expected: charming, wealthy, and adept at presenting a flawless image. The posts were a parade of luxury, vacations in exotic locations, expensive dinners and designer suits. And then there she was, Helena. Her name appeared in countless posts: anniversary celebrations, family gatherings, and candid shots of the two smiling together. She was beautiful in a timeless, understated way. Daniel noted the warmth in her eyes, the genuine joy in her smile, and the way James always seemed to be the center of her world. It was painfully clear that Helena adored her husband and had no idea what he was doing behind her back. Daniel stared at Helena's face on the screen, his anger flaring anew. She didn't deserve this. She was living a lie just as he had been. They were both victims of James and Clara's selfishness. After some hesitation, Daniel made his decision. Helena needed to know the truth. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about giving her the clarity and justice she deserved. He found Helena's contact information through her social media account and drafted a message. His heart pounded as he typed. "Hi Helena. My name is Daniel, and I need to talk to you about James. It's important and I wouldn't reach out like this unless it truly mattered. Please let me know if we can meet." He hesitated for a moment before hitting send. This was a step he couldn't take back. Helena responded the next morning with a brief but polite message. "I don't know what this is about, but I can meet you later today. Let me know where." Daniel chose a neutral cafe, a place far enough from both of their homes to ensure privacy. As he waited for Helena, he rehearsed what he would say. How do you tell someone that their entire life is built on lies? When Helena arrived, Daniel was struck by how composed she seemed. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She smiled politely but warily as she approached the table. "Daniel?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. He stood to greet her. "Yes. Thank you for coming. I know this is strange and I appreciate you giving me your time." They sat across from each other, the tension thick between them. "So," Helena began, folding her hands on the table. "What's this about?" Daniel took a deep breath. "It's about James, and my wife." Helena's brow furrowed in confusion, but as Daniel continued to speak, her expression shifted. He told her everything: how he had discovered Clara's affair, the messages and photos on her phone, and the connection to James. As he spoke, Helena's hands began to tremble. She bit her lip, her eyes glistening with tears that she was clearly trying to hold back. "I'm so sorry to tell you this," Daniel said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I thought you deserved to know. I know what it feels like to be lied to like this, and I couldn't let you stay in the dark." Helena wiped her eyes quickly, composing herself. "I knew something was wrong," she admitted, her voice breaking. "He's been so distant lately, always making excuses to stay out late or take calls in another room. But I never imagined this." Daniel nodded, understanding her pain all too well. "Neither did I. I thought my marriage was strong, but clearly, I was blind to what was happening right in front of me." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared betrayal hanging in the air. Helena was the first to break the silence. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice steadier now. Daniel hesitated. "I haven't decided yet. But I can't just let them get away with this. They destroyed our lives without a second thought." Helena nodded, her expression hardening. "You're right. They don't get to walk away from this unscathed. They need to understand the damage they've caused." The two of them began to talk, their initial awkwardness giving way to a shared resolve. They discussed options, weighing the consequences of each action. Helena suggested confronting James directly, but Daniel advised against it. "He's the type to spin this in his favor. If we're going to act, it needs to be something he can't manipulate." Helena agreed. "Then we expose them. Publicly if we have to. Let everyone know what they've done." Daniel felt a flicker of admiration for Helena's strength. Despite her pain, she was determined to take control of the situation. It gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Together they devised a plan. Helena would gather evidence from her side: photos, receipts, and any suspicious messages she could find on James' phone or laptop. Daniel would do the same with Clara's belongings. They agreed to compile everything into a dossier that would leave no room for denial. Helena also suggested reaching out to James' colleagues and social circle. "He thrives on his reputation," she said. "If people see him for who he really is, it'll hit him where it hurts most." Daniel hesitated at first. "Do you think we're going too far?" Helena met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "They didn't care about going too far when they were lying to us. Why should we hold back?" Daniel nodded. She was right. This wasn't about pettiness, it was about accountability. As they worked together, Daniel and Helena found solace in each other's company. Their shared experience created an unspoken bond, a connection born from the ashes of their respective betrayals. One evening, after hours of sifting through messages and documents, Helena looked up at Daniel and said, "It's strange. As painful as this is, I feel less alone now. Like I finally have someone who understands." Daniel offered a small smile. "Me too. I never thought I'd find strength in something so horrible, but here we are." By the end of the week, their plan was ready. Armed with undeniable evidence, they prepared to unleash the truth. Daniel and Helena both knew that what they were about to do would change everything, not just for James and Clara but for themselves as well. As they parted ways that evening, Helena placed a hand on Daniel's arm. "Whatever happens next, just know you're not alone in this." Daniel nodded, feeling a sense of solidarity he hadn't experienced in months. "Same to you. We'll get through this together." The stage was set and the fallout was inevitable. James and Clara thought they had been careful, but their web of lies was about to unravel in ways they never anticipated. Daniel had spent weeks planning every detail, each step a calculated move to ensure that James and Clara's betrayal would be exposed in the most devastating way possible. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore, it was about justice. For months, their actions had gone unnoticed, their lies concealed behind smiles and false sincerity. Now the truth would come crashing down on them, and Daniel was ready to pull the strings. The first target of Daniel's revenge was James, the man who had stolen what wasn't his and ruined multiple lives in the process. Together with Helena, Daniel compiled an airtight dossier of evidence: screenshots of text messages, explicit photos, timestamps of their meetings, and even receipts that proved the affair. They had everything they needed to dismantle James' carefully constructed life. Helena, who had initially been hesitant, was now fully committed to the plan. "He spent years building his reputation," she said. "Let's see how he handles losing it all." The first move was subtle but effective. Daniel sent an anonymous email to James' workplace, addressed to his HR department and a few senior executives. Attached were screenshots of James' conversations with Clara, along with a detailed explanation of how he had been using company resources, like expense accounts and travel allowances, to fund his affair. Within hours, the email had made its rounds, stirring whispers among James' colleagues. Daniel could imagine James walking into the office, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, only to find himself summoned to a meeting with HR. The thought brought a grim smile to Daniel's face. While James dealt with the fallout at work, Daniel and Helena turned their attention to his personal life. Using a fake social media account, Helena uploaded a post detailing James' affair. It was written as an open letter, directed at James but anonymous enough to leave people guessing. "To the man who thought he could have it all, your lies have caught up with you. Your wife, your family, your friends, they all deserve to know the truth. Attached are the receipts. You can't charm your way out of this one." Attached to the post were blurred but incriminating images, leaving enough detail to make James' identity obvious to those who knew him. Within minutes, the post began to gain traction. Comments flooded in, some shocked, others gleeful, and many expressing outrage. "Unbelievable," one commenter wrote. "I always thought he was such a stand-up guy. What a fraud." By the end of the day, the post had been shared dozens of times, reaching James' extended social circle. His friends, family, and even acquaintances began calling Helena, offering their sympathy or demanding explanations. Clara's exposure came next, and Daniel knew it had to be personal. He wasn't content with letting her simply fade into the background while James faced the brunt of the consequences. Clara had betrayed him, shattered their marriage, and she needed to face the music. Daniel reached out to Clara's closest friends and family, carefully crafting messages that detailed her actions without sounding vindictive. "I thought you should know what's been going on," he wrote, attaching screenshots of her conversations with James. "This isn't easy for me to share, but I believe the truth is important." The responses were immediate and varied. Some expressed disbelief while others offered their support. But the one thing they all had in common was a shared sense of disappointment in Clara. Her parents were devastated. Daniel imagined the conversation unfolding in their living room, Clara sitting in silence as her mother sobbed and her father demanded answers. Her friends, many of whom had admired her marriage to Daniel, began to distance themselves, unwilling to condone her actions. The climax of Daniel's revenge came when he and Helena orchestrated a confrontation. They arranged for James and Clara to meet at a public location, a coffee shop, and then showed up unannounced. Daniel arrived first, sitting quietly in a corner with Helena by his side. Clara and James entered a few minutes later, laughing softly, completely unaware of what awaited them. When Daniel stood up, Clara froze. Her face paled and her laughter died instantly. James' confident demeanor cracked, his eyes darting between Daniel and Helena. "Surprised to see us?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. Clara stammered, I can explain." But Daniel cut her off. "No need. I've seen everything. I know exactly what you've been doing behind my back." Helena stepped forward, her gaze locked on James. "And you," she said coldly. "Did you really think you could hide this forever? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" The coffee shop fell silent as the tension escalated. Other patrons watched in stunned silence, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. James tried to speak, but Helena held up a hand. "Save it," she said. "We're done. Both of you are done." Daniel placed a folder on the table between them. "Here's everything, your messages, your photos, your lies. Consider this the end of your little affair." The fallout was swift and brutal. James' employer terminated him within days, citing misconduct and misuse of company funds. His reputation, once spotless, was now tarnished beyond repair. Friends and colleagues who had once admired him now avoided him, unwilling to associate with someone so publicly disgraced. Clara's life unraveled as well. With her friends and family turning their backs on her, she found herself increasingly isolated. The art community she had been a part of distanced themselves, unwilling to overlook the betrayal that had been laid bare. Both Clara and James tried to rebuild, but the weight of their actions followed them everywhere. Daniel had ensured that their betrayal would never be forgotten, and Helena had made peace with the fact that her marriage to James was over. As Daniel watched the consequences of his actions unfold, he felt a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was a step toward healing. Clara and James had taken so much from him, but now they were the ones left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. For the first time in months, Daniel felt like he could breathe again. He wasn't the victim anymore. He had taken control, turned his pain into action, and found a way to move forward, and while the scars of betrayal would remain, they no longer defined him. In the months following the confrontation, the dust began to settle. For Daniel, it was the start of a new chapter, one marked by healing and self-discovery. The whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and revenge had finally subsided, leaving him with the quiet realization that life didn't end with heartbreak. It began anew. Daniel sold the home he had shared with Clara. Every room carried the weight of memories that no longer felt like his. The laughter they once shared, the dreams they had planned, it all felt tainted now. Letting go of the house was the first step toward letting go of the past. He moved to a smaller apartment on the edge of town, a place with bright windows and a peaceful view of a nearby park. It was quiet, modest, and entirely his own. He spent his mornings jogging along the tree-lined paths, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs as if it were cleansing his soul. His work became his refuge. The structured world of engineering offered him the stability he craved, a reminder that not everything in life was unpredictable. But it wasn't just work that gave him solace. He found himself reconnecting with friends he had unintentionally drifted away from during his marriage. He realized how much he had neglected these relationships in favor of Clara, and now he embraced them with a newfound appreciation. Helena, too, was rebuilding. The fallout from James' exposure had been devastating for her, but she found strength in her resilience. She moved out of the home she had shared with James and filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Helena was determined to reclaim her independence and rediscover the person she had been before James' lies consumed her. Throughout this journey, she and Daniel stayed in touch. At first, it was about practical matters, updates on the fallout, sharing small victories as they watched James and Clara's lives unravel. But over time, their conversations deepened. Helena's warmth and understanding became a source of comfort for Daniel. She knew his pain because she had lived it too. They met occasionally for coffee or walks in the park, their conversations filled with honesty and a surprising ease. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the water, Helena turned to Daniel. "Do you ever think we'd have met under different circumstances?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled, his gaze distant. "I don't know. But I do know that meeting you has made all of this easier." Helena reached for his hand, her touch gentle. "Me too. It's strange, isn't it? To find something good in the middle of so much pain." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at her, realizing that in the ashes of their broken marriages, they had found a connection that felt genuine and unforced. Whether it was the beginning of something new or simply a deep friendship, he didn't know. But for the first time in a long time he felt hopeful. Clara and James' long-term consequences. Meanwhile, Clara and James were living with the full weight of their actions. Clara moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, far removed from the social circle she once thrived in. Her friends had distanced themselves, and her family's disappointment lingered in every conversation. Her art, once her escape, now felt empty. Every stroke of the brush reminded her of what she had lost. Commissions dried up as word of her betrayal spread through her network. Clients who had admired her work now hesitated to associate with her. Clara tried to rebuild, but it was a lonely and uphill battle. James fared no better. The loss of his job and tarnished reputation left him scrambling for stability. Former colleagues avoided him, and social invitations became non-existent. Helena's divorce had stripped him of his home and much of his wealth, leaving him to confront the consequences of his arrogance and deceit. The once confident man who had captivated Clara now seemed hollow, a shadow of his former self. Their affair, once fueled by excitement and passion, had left both of them broken and isolated. For Daniel, watching their downfall wasn't as satisfying as he had imagined. It didn't undo the pain or bring back the life he had lost. But it gave him closure. Knowing that Clara and James were facing the consequences of their choices allowed him to finally let go of his anger. In its place he found something unexpected: gratitude. The betrayal, as painful as it had been, had forced him to confront parts of himself he had neglected. It had shown him the value of his own resilience, the strength in rebuilding, and the importance of surrounding himself with people who truly cared. On a crisp autumn morning, Daniel sat on a park bench, watching the leaves fall in golden and red hues. He thought about how far he had come since that first moment of discovery, the anger, the heartbreak, the revenge. He realized something important. The greatest revenge wasn't about ruining Clara and James' lives. It was about taking back his own. It was about finding peace, rebuilding with purpose, and refusing to let their betrayal define him. As he stood to leave, his phone buzzed with a message from Helena. "Coffee later?" Daniel smiled, pocketing his phone. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his again. And as he walked away, he carried with him a lesson he would never forget. Betrayal has consequences, and sometimes the best revenge is rebuilding yourself. And that wraps up today's story, my friends. A tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and the ultimate revenge. Daniel's journey wasn't just about exposing the lies. It was about reclaiming his life, finding strength in the chaos, and learning that the best revenge is living well and moving forward. What do you think? Did Daniel handle it the right way? Would you have done something differently? Let me know in the comments below. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts. If you found the story as gripping as I did, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves an epic revenge tale, and of course subscribe to Unheard Stories for more shocking and unforgettable content like this. And hey, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. We've got viewers from all over the world, and I love seeing how far these stories reach. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, betrayal may knock you down, but the way you rise up is what truly matters. Until next time, stay strong, stay wise, and I'll see you in the next video.